Something came from Baltimore.
Welcome to another edition of Something Came from Baltimore. My name is Tom Gowker, and I am your host. On the phone this evening, I have Minister Peter Graham. By day, he is a school teacher in the San Francisco School District. Peter has worked the metaphysical spiritual textbook called A Course in Miracles. Peter progressed from a student to an angel to a minister. For those who are not really familiar with A Course in Miracles, it debuted on the Oprah Winfrey Show during her syndicated run. Like Dr. Phil, Marianne Williams, who wrote The Course in Miracles, was a regular spiritual guru on the show. Fast forward to the present, I spoke with Minister Peter Graham in April to see if he wanted to be a guest on the show and explain his relationship with A Course in Miracles. I had this idea to interview various faith leaders like Quakers and Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was unaware at the time that Marianne Williams would run for president of the United States. And she made it to the top 20 Democrats who are campaigning for that position. What would a Marianne Williamson presidency look like? Tonight, we are interviewing Minister Peter Graham about Marianne Williams and the relationship with A Course in Miracles.
Ms. Williamson, this is a question for you. Excuse me, I'm addressing the question, Ms. Williamson. We've been talking a lot about access to health insurance, but for many Americans, their most pressing concern is the high cost of health care. How would you lower the cost of prescription drugs?
Well, first of all, the government should never have made the deal with the big pharma that they couldn't negotiate. That was just part of the regular corruption by which multinational corporations have their way with us. You know, I want to say that while I agree with, I'm with Senator Bennett and others, but I agree with almost everything here. I'll tell you one thing. It's really nice if we've got all these plans, but if you think we're going to beat Donald Trump by just having all these plans, you got another thing coming. Because he didn't win by saying he had a plan. He won by simply saying, make America great again. We've got to get deeper than just these superficial fixes, as important as they are. Even if we're just talking about the superficial fixes, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a health care system in the United States. We have a sickness care system in the United States. We just wait till somebody gets sick, and then we talk about who's going to pay for the treatment and how they're going to be treated. What we need to talk about is why so many Americans have unnecessary chronic illnesses, so many more compared to other countries. And that gets back into not just the big pharma, not just health insurance companies. It has to do with chemical policies. It has to do with environmental policies. It has to do with food policies. It has to do with drug policies.
Thank you.
It has to do with environmental
Senator
policies.
Bennett, a question.
Ms. Williamson.
Yes. Well, Donald.
Peter Graham, welcome to Something Came from Baltimore.
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm happy to be here, and I'm kind of excited to talk to you about A Course in Miracles.
Yes, yeah. We've been friends for years, so people realize we both lived in Philly at the time. And I believe you started A Course in Miracles before you moved to San Francisco, which would have been 19 years ago. So what was your previous religion, and where was the searching for that made you go into A Course in Miracles?
So, interestingly enough, it was actually a book by Marianne Williams that was my first exposure to A Course in Miracles. She wrote a bestseller called Return to Love, which I actually think was her first book as well. And it was based on her observations and teachings based on the principles of A Course in Miracles and just her sharing out her experience. So it was a pretty amazing book. And that got me thinking about, this book that, called A Course in Miracles, because there was some pretty profound quotes in it. Now, before to get back to your first question, I was raised as a Catholic. I was raised in Maple Shade, New Jersey, and it was kind of like a working class, I don't know, I guess say like a kind of a working class Irish German town, like most people were Irish or German or some mix of that. So it was kind of conservative, it was kind of a working class conservative area.
What do you feel brought you to the books themselves? What were you searching for?
Oh, that's a really good question, actually. Well, I think it's kind of like if you trace it over time, I think what happened was I was always kind of a spiritual person. Like for me growing up, the church was a comforting place for me. And I think early on realized, first of all, I'm gay. And I realized that for some reason the church was a safe haven for me. I felt safe in the church, and I felt like I had this connection to God. And so that was just kind of, that was just my first experience. So I had this, I had this connection. And then as I got older and I became more aware of my sexuality, and then also how the church, the Catholic Church, was, was really, at that point wasn't really a positive force for gay people. I began to explore outside of that. And so in college, I had some experience with liberation theology when I went to a trip to Central America. And then my own experience of coming out, I became a real kind of interested in doing work around social justice. And so my spirituality and my belief in social justice kind of merged. And so for a while I was going to a place called Dignity, which was an organization for gay Catholics, or LGBTQ Catholics, I should say. And we heard a lot of priests would come in, and a lot of them were very progressive theologians. They were really about fighting the church on its homophobia and offering a different point of view. So I actually got interested in one theologian called Matthew Fox, who was kicked out of the church, but had been a theologian in the Catholic Church before they kicked him out. And he wrote a book called Original Blessing. And that I studied for many years, his theology. And then eventually I found myself wanting more than just kind of like a political expression or a social expression of spirituality, and that kind of led me to the course.
What Donald Trump has done to these children, and it's not just in Colorado, Governor, you're right, it is kidnapping, and it's extremely important for us to realize that. If you forcibly take a child from their parents' arms, you are kidnapping them. And if you take a lot of children and you put them in a detainment center, thus inflicting chronic trauma upon them, that's called child abuse. This is collective child abuse. And when this is crime, both of those things are a crime. And if your government does it, that doesn't make it less of a crime. These are state-sponsored crimes.
Congressman.
And what President Trump has done is not only attack these children, not only demonize these immigrants, he is attacking a basic principle of America's moral core. We open our hearts to the stranger. This is extremely important. And it's also important for all of us to remember, and I have great respect for everyone who is on this stage, but we're going to talk about what to do about health care. Well, where have you been, guys? Because if it's not just a matter of a plan, and I haven't heard anybody on this stage who has talked about American foreign policy in Latin America and how we might have, in the last few decades, contributed to something big more.
Senator Gillibrand.
The course, I want you to explain exactly what's going on, but it seems like it's a 365 exercises, and they all have a purpose. What did you learn from the course, and where did it take you? Did it take you a full year to do it? And because we've had conversations about the very first one, I love. And it says everything means nothing, which you just had to repeat it over. And what it means is that you put the value on anything. If a pen has zero value unless you put that value on it. So everything in the universe means nothing until you put value into it. I believe in my heart that you were doing that before you moved away. And how long did it take you to do the exercises, and what was the spiritual progression that you felt after you were doing them or while you were doing them?
How about I cover a couple course basics and then get into your specific question? Is that cool?
Yeah, go into an overview for someone who doesn't know anything about what A Course in Miracles is, exactly what it is.
Okay, here we go. All right, let's give us a little overview. All right, first of all, the course. So A Course in Miracles is broken up into 3 sections, and it actually has 2 now additional sections that have been added to it. So there's 3 sections. There's a text, which is lays the theoretical foundation of the Course in Miracles. And then there's the lessons, which there's a lesson each day for 365 days. And on the leap years, you just do 1 lesson twice. And then the third section is a teacher's manual, which kind of gives it answers like it has like 20 or so questions in it that, like, for example, one question: what does reincarnation mean? Or what is reincarnation? It answers these different questions that someone who chooses to be a teacher of A Course in Miracles might want to consider, to read through. So those are the three sections. The idea is to basically to take in all of them. You can use all of them, but the lessons are helpful as a backdrop to studying the text because they really get more directly to the practice that the Course wants you to do. Now, the practice of the Course in Miracles, the immediate effect is to help you be at peace, to find inner peace. And so that is its, kind of like primary function is to be able to calm your mind and be upset less and so on and so forth. And I think we should probably talk a little bit about, how the Course came about. So the Course is essentially a channeled work. And that means that it essentially came from like another dimension. It was channeled through a research psychologist by the name of Helen Schuckman, and she was supported in the editing of that process by a gentleman by the name of Bill Thetford. Helen was considered the scribe of the Course. They were both clinical psychologists, very, very high-achieving academic people at Columbia University, the Ivy School in New York City. And this process took place from 1965 to 1972. What it was that Helen, essentially, it's not like heard a voice, but had these inner thoughts. And these thoughts she began writing them down. She didn't understand what they were all about. But eventually the thoughts were coming from, this entity that identified himself as Jesus. And so essentially, over this 7-year period, she channeled these 3 books. And essentially what it was that, if you want to look at it this way, is that the Course gives a metaphysical. In other words, it gives what was the reason for the creation of the physical world? And it explains what happened, kind of like the Adam and Eve story, although reinterpreted. And that explanation leads to a lot of explanations about why things happen the way they do now. And it was meant as, to provide a pathway back for people to be, the Buddhists might say, enlightened or awakened.
Extremely important, but there are specifics, there are symptoms, and the underlying cause has to do with deep, deep, deep realms of racial injustice, both in our criminal justice system and in our economic system. And the Democratic Party should be on the side of reparations for slavery for this very reason. I do not believe that the average American is a racist, but the average American is woefully undereducated about the history of race in the United States.
Ms. Williamson, hold one moment.
Just trust us on this.
The fact that somebody has a younger body doesn't mean you don't have
without
the ID.
reading the manual, would you say that, okay, so a lot of Christians are really, they're faith oriented on the Bible. There's a lot of stories that just doesn't feel like it connects with them. But do you feel that the explanations for A Course in Miracles are more rooted and they feel more sound?
Well, yeah. I mean, so here is kind of a mind-blowing thing that happens with A Course in Miracles. So what Jesus does in The Course in Miracles is what happened is this. Essentially what happened was this, is that when Jesus came, he came and taught. He was so advanced that most people could not understand what he was teaching. And there were a few people that were around, like actually Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene was actually his wife, and that's channeled in other books related to the Course. And there was another apostle there was a couple enlightened beings, but Jesus was the one that got chosen to be the teacher. So what happened is that, he lived, he taught, and, crucified. But what happened is that when the early church was formed, there was various different sects, and the Catholic Church ended up winning out, and it essentially took because it couldn't understand the true teachings of Jesus. So it took it and turned it into another religion of the world, which is not what Jesus had intended. What the Course in Miracles does is, in some way, it's a correction on, what the message was, what Jesus's message initially was. It turns out that his message was much closer to Buddhism or Hinduism, although there were, some more of an Eastern approach than, say, a Western approach.
So reincarnation is not something that the Catholic faith believes in, but you mentioned it. Is that something that A Course in Miracles does, and how does it define it?
So yeah, it's really interesting. So here's what is kind of mind-blowing about the Course in Miracles that's different. I have to kind of give you the origin story according to A Course in Miracles so that you can understand what it says about, based on what you just said, okay? So here's the origin story. Basically is that there is no difference between God and us, or our source and us, cause and effect. And what happened was that essentially our reality, our true reality, which is now blocked off from us, most of us don't have access to that because of choices that were made. But essentially what the Course says is that we still exist in this dimension with God in the true reality. And actually, there's only really one of us. Like you and I appear to be speaking, and there appear to be 7.8 billion people, and perhaps other beings on other universes or wherever, and galaxies or whatnot. But there's really only one of us. And what happened was the Course says there was this tiny mad idea that crept into, it said, the Son of God. And that idea was that essentially, hey, maybe we could be like God. Maybe we could, be the source. And essentially what happened was this idea came from a term which the Course calls the ego. And the ego is not the same. It's not exactly the same thing that like psychologists use, meaning the ego, or Freud would use, or anything like that. But the ego is the belief in separation, the belief that we can be individuated or individual from God. So what happened early on was we had this thought. We had to choose if we wanted to, because like our source or God creates, but also isn't going to limit us. Like we can make choices. So we meaning really one of us, just chose to separate, to adapt this idea. Yeah, we can be separate. We can all be like our little individual, can't have our individual kingdoms. So what happened was, in order to do that, we sided with the ego, but we then had to create actually this physical world, which is an illusion, because it's not real. So we had when we did this could go back. Now this is where it merges with physics. You've heard of the Big Bang, right?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So like everyone associates the beginning of the cosmos. Well, the physical universe. So that Big Bang, if you want to look at it from a metaphysical standpoint, took place at that time when we decided that we were going to essentially create an alternate reality. So we create this alternate reality, and we're like, holy crap. All right. Because what happened was, if you create something that's not of God, what is it going to be? Well, it's going to be just the opposite. So essentially what the Course says is, we were existing in this reality of unbelievable love, peace, unity. There was no sense of any of us being separate or different from God. We're just all this one being, essentially. Just the only difference is that God was the source, and God's love created infinitely. And we kind of appropriated that for our own purposes, and we created the physical universe. Now, the problem is that it was now, but if we were going to do that, it was going to be a separate universe, and the separate universe was going to be governed not by a loving thought system, but just the opposite, a fearful thought system. And so that fearful thought system is this. Now we now have this, what the Bible might call the devil, which is like the serpent, but we have this ego. And so the ego does a lot of things, creates the physical universe basically as a gigantic distraction from our source. And then it kind of cuts off our mind from conscious contact with God. And so here we are now, and because you've heard of the unconscious, you've heard about things where we don't have access to. So essentially, deep down in our mind, we're still connected, but we don't have access to it. And so
Is that because we're in a fearful universe? So
right,
it's either
yes.
nature nurture combination that this creates that. Isn't it really everyone's ultimate religious goal is to be conscious, not knowledgeably conscious and loving?
Well, I like the Course would even say that consciousness is like in the realm of God is knowledge. It's just all. It's very hard for us to understand because it's a unified system. There is no other, right? When we went with the ego and created the physical universe, what happened was there was what's called duality, a subjective reality. So now it appears that you and I are having a conversation. We appear to be separate, right? And then just think about how this world of separation that we're in, this duality, it's always subject object. Okay, so I'm talking to you, you're talking to me. You have your life, you have your job, you have your family, you have all these what appear to be these individual perceptions taking place. So we're in this perceptual reality now. But the problem with it is that it's all based on the ego system, which is based on fear. Because this is what happened when we had this experience of breaking away from our source or God. The ego told us, oh, now you're really in trouble. Okay. And these are all unconscious beliefs. The ego told us you're really in trouble. God's going to be pissed off at you, and he's going to come and he's going to vanquish you. And so what happened is that if you notice, take a look at most of the world's religions. Most of the religions they're based on a fearful, wrathful God. And eventually that if you've committed, let's talk about Christianity, because that's where our frame of reference is. And actually the Course was channeled in terms to try to reinterpret Christianity as much as anything. But with Christianity, what does it say? It says that, right, we killed God's son, right? And that God forgave us. But it has all these trappings in it. It's like we're sinful. Like, that's why you have to be baptized to save yourself from original sin. And that you got to keep going to confession. So there's all these apparatuses that exist. And essentially what we have in Christianity is not a God of love, but a God of the ego, which says, if I worship God and do the things that God says I should do, the behaviors that God says that I should do, that maybe I'll get salvation. But if I don't, I'm surely going to hell.
Well, yeah, I actually believe the fear base is more on the lines of a control of a population. You're just like the fear is to keep everyone in line. It's a fear is to create a wealth of people who are not conscious, and that they're not available to their soul or the light. And the fear-based piece is designed just to keep a mass in place. I don't think it's done in any kind of spiritual way other than that.
Because the ego is very complicated. So, and the ego does this so that we can say in kind of perpetual darkness. But think of it this way, like most of it's easier for us to watch the news and watch world events and say, oh my God, what a horrible thing that's going on, and so on and so forth. What happens, like, say, in a family level or on a community level or an international level, also takes place within the dynamics of our individual ego dynamics. So we're projecting, that idea where we're projecting a lot of fear and a lot of guilt onto our relationships, where on whatever level it may be. And what the Course is trying to do is help us to heal that, because the way we heal, that healing process will bring us back to our true minds.
So you have the Course in Miracles, and now you have the San Francisco area has a formal church to go to. And how's that feel? And this is you're following some kind of spiritual guidance from people who are still alive. So how does that feel also?
Well, this kind of takes us back. Well, from the beginning, like you had said to me, I remember when we knew each other in Philly that I was studying it. What I realized is that those lessons that you read at the beginning, I tried to do the lessons on my own, and they made me depressed. What do they mean? Nothing you see means anything. And I was like, oh my God, what does that mean? I didn't understand it. So when I moved out to San Francisco in December '99, and I began taking classes that January of 2000 at the Community Miracle Center. And I started studying with the folks there. It was Reverend Tony Ponicello and Reverend Larry Bedini who started the organization. And it's a teaching organization, but it is a church. It also has a church service on Sunday, but they taught a lot of classes. So I really needed to go to there. And it took me, I immediately got in there to their training program, a minister training program, because I had always kind of wanted to be a minister. And if the Catholic Church wasn't so kind of off the deep end, I probably would have been a priest. So what I did was I started studying there, but it took me a long time to start really understanding the message of the Course and what it meant, and how to actually, how is it what is a miracle? How do you access a miracle? And then also trying to understand some of you can tell me trying to explain to you the kind of the philosophy or the understanding the origins of the world, of the universe. It's hard.
John Kennedy did not say, I have a plan to get a man to the moon, and so we're going to do it, and I think we can all work together, and maybe we can get a man on the moon. John Kennedy said, by the end of this decade, we are going to put a man on the moon. Because John Kennedy was back in the day when politics included the people, and included imagination, and included great dreams, and included great plans. And I have had a career not making the political plans, but I have had a career harnessing the inspiration and the motivation and the excitement of people, masses of people. When we know that when we say we are going to turn from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we're going to have a Green New Deal. We're going to create millions of jobs. We're going to do this within the next 12 years, because I'm not interested in just winning the next election. We are interested in our grandchildren.
All right, we got to. We're going
to. I'm a Quaker, and I always say that there's a light and dark inside of me, and to be aware of it and always run to the light in every situation as possible, and realize that.
I like that. Yeah.
There's
run to the light. I love it.
Run to the light, because you have both within you, and the only way to find a positive or be in a situation and is decide to throw some love into light, and to think positive, and to really acknowledge that does exist. The darkness is within you.
No, and actually what you said is a really, really, it's an important part of the Course too. One of the things you just said there, Tom, and that is that what Jesus says is that you have to be willing to bring the darkness to the light. And that's where we fall down. We don't want to bring the darkness to the light, because sometimes the darkness, if we think about it, it's like like if you talk to an actor, what does the actor want to play, the hero or the villain? What looks more fun? The villain, right? Think of the Joker in the Batman, from that scene. But I mean, so we like the thing is that our minds are unbelievably powerful. And what we've done is we've taken the power of the mind and we've made this amazing physical universe, right? And we think it's all that, but then after we live long enough, we realize, wait a minute, there's got to be something else, like all roads lead to where, eventually, the things of this world, if we're honest about it, eventually they disappoint us. Even if you've got all the money in the world, even if you have all the love in like what you think is love or whatever it is, it all eventually kind of turns on you. And so that's the point where what you were saying is, like the Quakers teach, is you have to go within, because you have to bring the darkness, you have to bring your pain to the light. And so many people don't do that, right? What do they do with their pain? And then myself included, we project it out, like we blame somebody else for it. We're dreaming. And the other thing it talks about is that there's a script. So the ego has a script, right? And so our lives are actually, this is scary for people to hear, I think, but our lives are actually scripted out at what's going to happen. And the only choice that we have is we can choose to perceive it with the Holy Spirit or love, or with fear. And so we're constantly confronted with these different choices. And it's like Course says, what teacher are you going to go to? You're going to go to the ego and fear, or you're going to go to forgiveness, which is letting go of the ego's perception and choose the Holy Spirit or love's perception of the event.
You may only get one shot, and your first issue that you're going to push, you get one shot that it may be the only thing you get passed. What is that first issue for your presidency?
And Ms. Williamson,
My
with the
first
last
call
word.
is to Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that her goal is to make New Zealand the place where it's the best place in the world for a child to grow up. And I will tell her girlfriend you were so on, because the United States of America is going to be the best place in the world for a child to grow up.
And this is what this question is, which is...
But then Marianne Williams, her intentions was to be a nominee for the Democrats and for 2020. And then she turns around and she makes it to the top 20. So you got to give her credit for that. She's completely the opposite of a Donald Trump. But when she got on stage, I felt that, it's becomes a show, where she's actually performing. And, I don't know who her handlers are, but I don't think she came off that well. She became more of a caricature. But at the same time, when the Republicans, had their 7 or 8 people out there, they had a lot of characters out there too. So I'm hoping that she makes it to round 2 and she does have enough support, even if they find her comical, with what she's saying. They're saying it at one hand, but on the other hand, like Bill Maher was like, well, she did say something that I really appreciate. So, and she's the only one that did it. So they acknowledge the fact that she's not a loon. She's just coming from a different place. Do you feel that?
Well, you mean you mean her comment on the healthcare system, that it's a sick care. What was the word she used? Sick care system or something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
It doesn't promote wellness, right?
No.
Yeah, and that's and I think the other thing she said too, which was interesting, she says that all these plans, and I'm as you know, you and I go way back, and we both like to talk politics, and because it's tied to our own civil rights, but she even put out there, look, she's like, your plans aren't going to win the election, even if you have great plans. That's what Trump proved. I mean, Trump didn't have a plan, but he resonated with what he resonated with was this like anti-establishment problem, and that it was so out of touch with people's needs, and he was able to tap into it. And Hillary Clinton, was seen as more of an establishment character, so that's it. And I think you're right about Marianne Williamson, is that, she is coming from this perspective of, like more, I think, I don't know, like more we're all in this kind of together, although Trump is more divisive, I think. His ideas are more divisive. Marianne's I feel like she's saying we're all in this together, that we have to start treating each other as brothers and sisters, and seeing the commonality. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from her. Like in the Course in Miracles community, Marianne's somewhat controversial because one of the things that is a Course concept of is that the world is not real. It's a dream, it's an illusion, kind of like the Buddhists and the Eastern philosophy, right? And so one of the things it says for is that, you have to be careful. Like the world is the ego's distraction device, right? So it's like a movie. And so if you go out and you try to fix the movie, it's like if you go to the movies, can you go up to the screen and start trying to change the events on the screen? No, you can't, right? It's coming from the projector. So the ego is like the projector. So it's got this script that it's running. And the danger is that you think that you're, by changing the world, like what is it that we're all after? Like you think to this deeper question. We think that if you change like who's in charge, or you change the story, the outer script, is that it's going to change your peace. And the truth is it's not, because the ego is always we're always projecting problems from our like inside of us. So the thing that we have to remember is that what's really going to involve our inner peace is not changing the world, but changing our mind about the world, changing our thoughts about the world. Because the world was, remember, what is the origin of the world? The origin of the world is to kind of create distraction from our inner life, like you were saying earlier, going within. So that's one of the things we all want to have, like a culture and a society that's more high-minded. But where it's going to happen is by people going within and doing this kind of work. And it doesn't have to be the Course in Miracles. It can be done in meditation. It can be done in yoga. It can be done in Buddhism. It can be even done in Catholicism, because the truth is that, Christianity has its version of like people that get it too. Like that you have to go in, you have to do your inner work. And as more and more of us do in our inner work, what we'll then see reflected on the outside is that's when we'll see a world that's healing.
You're likely going to have to reset a relationship between America and another country or entity if you become president, perhaps because of some relationship that you just mentioned about President Trump. What is the first relationship you like to reset as president? I'll go down the line, and I'll start with Ms. Williamson.
Well, one of my first phone calls would be to call the European leaders and say, we're back. Because I totally understand how important it is that the United States be part of the Western Alliance.
I'm trying to get one or two words here.
45 seconds.
I thank you for joining me on Something Came from Baltimore.
Well, I thank you for having me on, Tom. Great to do it. And thanks for, your interest in the Course. And I can't wait to hear it. Well, and I don't know if you can include this in your podcast, but I wanted to say, I think there's one book out there that people could read to really make the Course understandable for them. And I wonder if I could plug that.
Plug it.
Okay. It's a really cool book. It's called The Disappearance of the Universe. And the author's name is Gary Renard. And I find it a really good starter to kind of simplify the Course. And it's done in a very cool format, which I'm not going to tell you right now, but it's kind of done in a dialogue format, which is kind of interesting.
Perfect. I'll give it a shot.
I'm sorry we haven't talked more tonight about how we're going to beat Donald Trump. I have an idea about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not going to be beaten just by insider politics talk. He's not going to be beaten just by somebody who has plans. He's going to be beaten by somebody who has an idea what this man has done. This man has reached into the psyche of the American people, and he has harnessed fear for political purposes. So, Mr. President, if you're listening, I want you to hear me, please. You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. So sir, I have a feeling you know what you're doing. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field, and sir, love will win.
Something came from Baltimore. Something came from Baltimore.